Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the NASW New York CARES Community Engagement Initiative for the first event of the Spring 2026 NASW New York Immigration Series, presented by the NASW New York Immigration and Global Social Work Collective, Reimagining the Cultural Genogram, a feminist reframing of family and power. My name is Angelique Imani Rodriguez, and I'm the Manager of Membership Engagement and Special Programs with NASW New York. I'm so happy to have you all here today. We appreciate your attendance and support of NASW New York chapter programming. Registration for the upcoming first annual NASW New York CE conference, where you can earn up to 7.5 CE contact hours, is still open for registration. There's non-CE student sessions if you'd like to join us, but don't need the CE contact hours. A hybrid format conference. You can join either in person or online. You don't want to miss out. Registration does close this week on May 15th. NASW New York CARES will be taking a brief break in June 2026 to prep for some incredible programming we're coordinating for July. To stay updated on all things NASW New York, we hope that you opted to sign up for the NASW New York email list and take a look at the weekly email digest that goes out every Wednesday and includes all of the latest updates, upcoming items, and opportunities from the chapter. Post-event, you'll receive an email that will share all of this information being shared tonight about what's upcoming at the chapter, as well as any resources or information provided by today's hosts. If you're currently waiting on materials from recent NASW New York CARES events, you should be receiving those items soon. Personally, thank you all so much for your patience as I navigate some delays on my end. I appreciate it. Please remember that by registering for any NASW New York events, you agree to abide by the NASW New York anti-harassment policy, the link of which I will drop for you all in the chat shortly. Once again, thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions about this event or any other NASW New York CARES community engagement events, I will drop my email in the chat for you shortly as well. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our illustrious hosts for this evening, Dr. Elaine Congress and Dr. Molly Lazar-Charter. Ladies, whenever you're ready, please feel free to unmute and begin.
Okay, we're going to put up our slides. Okay.
All right. Can everyone see the slides?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
I'll begin. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad to see you all here at this really exciting event. I'm Dr. Elaine Congress. I'm Associate Dean and Professor at Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service in New York City.
And I'm Molly Lazar-Charter. I'm also at the Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service, and I'm an online faculty member.
Okay.
So today we're going to do a brief introduction of ourselves. Then we're going to talk about the Culturagram, both how it was created and what it's about. And we'll also talk about intersectional feminism. And so it's sort of this combination of intersectional feminism and the Culturagram, which has led us to develop the Person-in-Culturagram, which is sort of the center of what our presentation is about today. Once we're finished with that, we'll of course leave time for questions and comments.
Okay, well, this is a little bit about myself. I'm, in addition to being an associate dean and professor, I write, I write books, and this is one of my books in multicultural perspectives and working with families, which is something I've been interested in for a long time. I've been very interested in cultural diversity, and this is I'm preparing the 5th edition, which will be out this fall.
I'm Molly Lazar-Charter again. So I consider myself an intersectional feminist researcher as well as a faculty member at Fordham. My history and research really revolves around feminism, gender, and families. And I'm specifically interested in the role of feminism in social work education. In this particular article, my coworker and I found that social work students tend to promote feminist ideals, but might not be able to identify when there are gender disparities. So that was something really interesting that we found. And since this work, I've continued to be interested in the role of feminism in social work.
Okay. Yeah, this is something I also should mention. I've been very interested in women's issues. In fact, I was in the first NASW committee on women right after I graduated from social work school, and I joined NASW. But today I'm going to talk about the culturegram, and we're going to tie it to to work with women. Um, Let me tell you a little bit about the culturegram. Next slide, please. Um, uh, the culturegram is something that I developed. I found in my first job, I worked with people from many different backgrounds, and I wasn't very prepared. I hate to say. So how could I work? How could I help these people? I didn't understand they really came from very different cultures. So it came to me one rainy Saturday afternoon about doing the a culturegram. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today. I looked at other family assessment tools. I already was starting to teach family therapy, and there was the Echo Map, and that looked at the family and relationship to outside entities. And then I also looked at the Genogram, which you're probably more familiar with, that looks at family relationships, but neither of them mentioned culture. So that also led me to think I really wanted something to help me more working with people from diverse backgrounds. Next slide. Okay, so this is how I first developed the culturegram. I first did it, I sort of published about it, and I guess it was, I don't know, 1995. But since then, it's been changed a couple of times. Um, I've amended it, and we'll talk a little bit about it as I go through, because I thought that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So that's why I kind of constructed this way of looking at the culturegram. And let us begin. I begin with reasons for migrating. Um, this is and also let me just mention there I have 10 aspects, and they're not arranged in any particular order. This is how it came to me. So I'm going to kind of go through this. Reasons for migrating. And there are push and pull factors. What are push factors? I mean, not enough to eat, dangerous conditions, violence, also the natural disasters. I mean, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes. There are all kinds of reasons why people choose to migrate. They're push factors, but there also are pull factors. Why do they go to particular? Why do people go to particular countries? Often, someone, a relative or friend, has gone to this country and says, come to my new country. You'll things will be better for you." But a lot of times people are looking for places where there's enough to eat, there's more safety, there are opportunities to go to school and for their children to go to school. So this is what leads people to migrate. Next, please. Okay. Now, this legal status, this is a big issue, and probably even more important now than when I first did the culturegram. But in my first experience, I worked with many Puerto Ricans, and as we know, they're American citizens. But this became even more important as I started to work with people from many different backgrounds who had different laws, about migration, and people who might not have the needed documents to migrate to the United States. So, but this is important to know. However, sometimes we have to be a little careful in getting this information from people because it may be thought that we really are working for ICE rather than social workers. So, But this is important to know because we can recommend help or get help for immigration lawyers, in terms of like legal status. Next. Okay. Time in the community. The longer that someone stays in the community, chances are, they'll become more assimilated or acculturated, which is really what we hope to, that people take the culture of both kind of American culture, but also maintain their own culture. And they've done studies that people who stay in environments where it's mainly people from their previous culture are less likely to kind of really get to know the American culture. There's zero difference for people who live in places in New York City, which is solely Latino, as compared to people who migrated and stay in Missouri when they may be the only Latino family in the whole town or the whole area. Next, language. Um, Often people will speak at home their original language, but learn English or speak English, of course, when children go to school, but also, in community and in terms of working, it's helpful for them to know English. So, and this really depends on families. However, this is a little bit unfortunate. I've known some families, Latino families, and I found the children, they don't like know their native language at all because their parents have said, I really want you to fit in America, so we're only going to speak English now. So, so this is something one has to be alert to. Next, health beliefs. A lot of times people have different ideas about health. And this is important for us to know and to learn and not to immediately discount it. Also, access is a big issue. Very often, people who lack information about health and who don't have a doctor or someplace they can go will kind of just depend on the emergency room. And emergency rooms are not good in terms of preventive care. They don't do any of it, and they really aren't the best solution. But accessing health care in the United States is very challenging, even for someone who's a native speaker. And so, I mean, this is something we often kind of work with immigrants around. Trauma. Many immigrants first, and they've encountered a lot of traumatic events even before they've left home. But now that they are here in the United States, there's a lot of traumatic events that they encounter. Such as poverty, such as fires, violence in their neighborhood. So this is something that's important to take into account. Next, many immigrants have traditions, religious traditions, holidays, days, special foods, clothes, and I think it's really important for us to know and to understand this and to respect this and include this. So let me talk a bit about oppression. The first culturegram I did, this was really minimal, if at all. But in terms of presenting about the culturegram in so many places, I became very aware of how much oppression or discrimination really affected the life of immigrants. And we certainly see this now, all of these beliefs about about immigrants being criminal, immigrants taking away resources, and even though most of us are positive about immigrants, we still hear all this in the background. So, and this is something that immigrant families encounter every day, and it's often sometimes in terms of microaggressions even. So this is something for us to really be aware of. Okay. Um, Now, the next two things, the final thing, is I was teaching family therapy. So I was very concerned about what families thought about their values. First, about external things like work and education. What are their attitudes toward work and what kind of work? And then about, education. But then the last one has to do with family dynamics. What's going on within the family? How different is this like a family in the United States as compared to like families in the country that they came from? How do they negotiate it? What family myths do they have? What family rules do they have? So this is a little bit about the culturegram. Next slide. Okay, I mean, you can see about the different factors, in the culturegram. But then I also became aware, very aware, that this is really the client story. This is the immigrant story. This is not something that's written about them. And this is the problem with the way there were lots of books at that time, working with Latino clients, working with Italians, working with Chinese. And but they weren't written by someone with that nationality or background. They were written by, usually like white people making writing these books. So I really thought to really kind of exercise cultural humility. Everyone knows his or her own story better. And so this is what the culturegram permits, or encourages an immigrant to share their stories. So this is so I really saw the culturegram as moving us toward cultural humility. Also, it's really a DEI perspective, which I mean, it's kind of come about since I first developed the culturegram. But as you know, it really stresses diversity and beyond diversity, it's equity that everyone is important and equal and valuable, and also inclusion. So there's a DEI perspective. Want to go on? Okay. So so anyway, I talked about the 10 aspects of culture. Next. And I said a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this is what I created. And it's and a podcast was done about it if you're interested in learning more about it. And next slide. A lot has been written about it in different formats. Working with older people, working with children, working with victims of domestic violence, working with immigrants, and more recently working with indigenous people. So this is so if you're interested, I think NASW is going to be sending you a list of these publications if you'd like to read more about the culturegram and how it's been applied to different populations. Next slide.
All right. So
Right.
intersectional feminism. Yep.
Yeah.
Feminism is a framework that's been hugely influential in feminist discourse and also in social work. In the way that we conceptualize experience, especially experience related to social identity. And social identities include things like race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and so on. So, a central theme in intersectionality is the idea that social identities can intersect, which will create different and unique experiences. And a way to conceptualize this is to think about an example. So, we know that the experience of being a Black woman is going to be different than a white woman or a Black man, and that the identities of race and gender come together to form different experiences for people. So, as social workers, we haven't always attended to our mission of social justice and have even engaged in some oppressive ways. At times, we failed to help and even harmed, such as during the Japanese internment camps, blocking Black women from gaining the right to vote. And we have sort of a tenuous relationship with feminism, where at times we seem to be a little bit behind the times with feminism, where feminism is not always centered in education. We remain about 85% women social workers, but women faculty still earn less than men. And women, Black, and Latinx social workers earn less than white male social workers. So sometimes in social work education, or in social work in general, we may not always be focusing on the importance of gender and sometimes other social identities as well. So in the early 1990s, around the same time that Dr. Congress came up with the culturogram, Kimberly Crenshaw came up with intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw is a legal scholar, and she introduced this concept where we move away from this singular understanding of oppression and experience and towards an intersectional understanding. We tend to look at oppression along a singular axis so that we look at racism or sexism or ageism or homophobia, right? But we miss the many groups of people who belong to many of those identities or several of those identities. So Crenshaw who is a legal scholar, she referenced a case where Black women sued a car manufacturer for discrimination. And the court said that Black women could not be considered a special class and that sexism wasn't happening because white women were hired and that there's some understanding that Black men were being hired. And so the idea here was that there was nowhere that this group fit, that the experiences of Black women wasn't the same as white women and wasn't the same as Black men, and that their experiences needed to be attended to. And that's where intersectionality really began. So intersectionality emphasizes social identity, that social identity is key to experience. When intersectionality was first developed, it really focused in on race, gender, and socioeconomic status. But since then, it's blossomed to include lots of social identities that are important, such as sexual orientation, ability, ethnicity, religion, gender, and so on. So the idea here, one of the central ideas, is that one, social identities are going to confer your experience of oppression and potentially also your experience of power. So the more centralized in terms of dominant culture your social identity is, the more likely you are to have access to power. So Dr. Congress and I noted that there are some commonalities here between the culturogram and the intersectional framework. The culturogram moves away from seeing immigrants as just this monolithic group, and the intersectional framework moves away from seeing people according to only one social identity. So when combining the culturogram with the intersectional framework, we add another layer of experience where social identity is centered as a guide for both the experiences immigrants may have had in the past and will likely have in the US. So an example here, or that helps me think about it, is that a white man immigrating to the US is likely to have a really different experience than, say, a Black woman. If you add additional layers of social identity, this becomes even more pronounced. So, if a white man who has a high socioeconomic status, speaks English as a first language, and has no visible disabilities immigrates to the US, his experience will be very different than a Black woman who has a low socioeconomic status, speaks limited English, and has a visible disability. So the central idea that Dr. Congress and I had is that by combining the culturogram with this intersectional framework, we can better attend to the experiences of immigrants. And that led us to develop the Person-in-Culturagram. So Dr. Congress, I think you're on this one.
Okay, and this is you can see what I have around the culture, but inside, how does it relate to all of these factors? I mean, um, and gender very, very important, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on primarily. But other things are very important. Social economic class is extremely important. Age is very important. Um, Sexual, orientation is very important. Disability is very important. So these are all I like identities that play out in terms of like power and control. And so, I mean, I think it really behooves us to consider not just the ethnicity, which is kind of what the culturegram did. But to look at it more in terms of all these other identities is when we're working with a client, because the client brings in all these different identities within himself or herself. Okay, next slide.
So what we did here is we centered the intersectional identity. So in the middle, we sort of replaced what was in the middle of the culturegram previously and centered intersectional identity. So that this becomes the first thing that a social worker would assess with a client. And again, with the idea that intersectional identity is going to really influence experience in the US and potentially did as well in their previous living place. So again, this is the same example. So how might experiences be different if a white man with a high socioeconomic status is immigrating to the US versus a Black woman with a low socioeconomic status? So again, kind of starting off looking at the person's unique individual or unique intersectional identity. We know that experiences of oppression, discrimination, bias, and racism are all likely to hinge on social identities. And then similarly, access to power hinges on social identities as well. And we know that there is often a lot of prejudice against immigrants, and that is going to hinge again on this idea of social identity. So people are going to be far more likely to experience these prejudices depending on their social identity. So another example here. Those who immigrate from, say, South Africa or England and appear white are far less likely to have these experiences. Some of the prejudices that people may face include being called lazy, criminal, monopolizing resources, and so on. And we saw another example of this during COVID when people who looked Asian faced increased discrimination and violence.
Oh, okay. Let's go back to look at like pull factors, reasons for migrating and how this is really affected using this kind of larger framework of this intersectional approach. And I thought of it mainly in terms of in terms of gender, but it's also application for some of these other identities. Reasons for migrating. First, then women are very challenged with migrating. There may be an issue of them being trafficked. They may be escaping from a domestic violence, situation. They may encounter a lot of violent episodes on the trip here, and they may also have a lot of violence, once they've arrived. So I think, with women, I mean, it's particularly important to think of it just not just in terms of culture, but also kind of the impact of with gender. And again, this makes the social economic class, it makes a difference too. Women who are poor are often at greater stress and are much more vulnerable and don't have maybe other resources that can help them. Okay, next slide. Legal status. Fortunately, this isn't perfect, but fortunately, there are some ways that immigrant women are protected. Immigrant women who live with someone who maybe have a green card or be a citizen who abuses them. Previously, they had not elected to stay. I mean, they just couldn't handle it. They couldn't survive. But now they apparently are supposed to be protected and not be deported. Now, however, we know what the current world is like. So I don't know as much about if they would be as protected now. But legally, there's not supposed to be deported if someone if their spouse or their partner turns them in for the and because he's angry at them. So this protects undocumented women. So this is what's one thing that's good. There's a whole series of laws to protect women. But we know there are also laws that don't really help women in terms of immigration. So this is something we have to consider. There also are laws, and speaking about different identity in terms of social economic status, you have people who have higher income maybe can find laws that can protect them more as they immigrate than other women who are poor. Next. Okay, again, acculturation varies on where someone lives. Um, I mean, it's very interesting. There was a time that, women maybe were not as acculturated as quickly because they were like in the home all the time. Now, women work outside the home, and so chances are they also are exposed to, like American culture. So bring both with them. So, um, I mean, it's really helpful for those who kind of have some understanding of English. Uh, but of course, it depends on the section. Only knowing, say, Spanish, if you live in New York City, I mean, you're going to be okay. But it's going to be much more challenging if you don't know English, if you're living, in North Dakota, for example. So, so this is something to think about. Next slide. Okay, this is health, and I'm very interested in health and how this affects women. Now, uh, first thing, there are a lot of beliefs about health, and and we tend to, we've all heard stories about health from our parents or grandmothers. But it's very important for us to take this into consideration in working with immigrants, because a lot of these things that we've heard are really, really have turned out to be true. Like I bet if you have a bad cold and you go to a doctor, he'll say, "Well, just kind of rest and take it easy and drink hot chicken soup." Kind of same thing that our mothers and grandmothers told us. And so anyway, I guess my point is that immigrants, women have a lot of these beliefs, and it's important that that they really have value. Uh, so also, and mental health is a very important issue, and there's a lot of reluctance. I think women maybe take a little bit more um, freely to the idea of mental health, but still, mental health counseling is not something that people go to that much. But I think women are more likely to get involved, maybe than men. But again, there are economic factors. Poorer women don't have the time, money, or energy to engage in mental health care. So another big issue is in terms of healthcare. And as you may know about maternal mortality, it's embarrassing high in this country as compared to all other developed countries. We have the highest degree of maternal mortality. And as you can imagine, it has something to do with their people's race, and it has to do with their immigration status. So, I mean, this is really something for us to be, for us to really to notice. Um, and also, I mean, there's a lot of issues now in terms of reproductive care, and as we know, this is really under siege. And so this is something for us to also think about in working with women. Okay, next slide. I think you're on, right?
Yep. So, trauma is important to think about because people may have experienced trauma in their previous country, and that's the reason they decided to leave, potentially. trauma can be experienced while migrating and may be experienced once in the US. And so, as Dr. Congress noted, it may be especially salient for women because of the risk of trafficking, interpersonal violence, and sexual violence. We can also conceptualize climate change as introducing trauma, environmental trauma, environmental racism, and just noting that the effects of climate change are often experienced in low socioeconomic areas, both abroad and in the US. Once people are in the US, trauma may occur related to an intersectional identity. So that's again where that intersectional framework comes in. There may be stressors around deportation or potential traumas around deportation. And Dr. Congress noted earlier, the Violence Against Women Act can be useful in helping women who've experienced domestic violence, trafficking, and so on. So just something important to be aware of when working with clients. So again, applying that intersectional lens, those with dominant religions or religions that are consistent with the dominant culture are more likely to be able to access those religious spaces once they're in the US. So if one is a member of, is a Christian, for example, they're much more likely when in the US to be able to find a church to go to than, say, some other religions. Similarly, people who identify as Christian will have days off of work or school days off that align with their religion or the religious holidays. But it may be much more difficult for people from different religions to find spaces to practice their religion. They may not have days off of work or even have other people know what their holidays are. And also important to think about is that wearing religious symbols like a veil may be a source of marginalization for some people. So education or the prospect of education and work might be a reason to migrate to the US. In terms of education, the educational system is complicated, and there are norms here that may be different than someone's native country, such as like parental involvement. Applying that intersectional lens again, those who are fluent in English are probably going to have a much easier time navigating the educational system. Similarly, mothers are probably going to be tasked with negotiating school systems. And importantly, systemic racism in the U.S. Contributes to the school to prison pipeline, which can affect kids of color and also particularly girls of color. So, in terms of work, that can also be very complicated depending on legal status and whether degrees can be transferred. So, someone might have a degree that could potentially be high earning in the US, but it doesn't transfer here, or they need to take more courses, or there are a lot of hoops to go through. The literature shows that immigrants are more likely to work in jobs that lack benefits, that are hourly, that are dangerous or exploitative. Undocumented workers earn far less than documented workers for the same work, and undocumented women are far less likely to work than undocumented men. So that can put women at risk if they are in a relationship, for example, that they might want to leave, but they don't have a source of income. So structures of families can be very different from culture to culture. In the US, we tend to have the nuclear family as primary, but it's important to understand that there are many different familial norms in other cultures. In patriarchal cultures, men may be more likely to be the decision makers. In some cultures, older family members or even in-laws might be decision makers or people who are kind of key in making big decisions. Culture may impact how people live together, such as in multi-generational households. In many cultures, including the US, women tend to engage in a wealth of unpaid work, such as childcare, elder care, and housework. So, elder care is increasing, and that can include partners' families or other relatives. In the US, we have little support for paid maternity leave or childcare, so another important factor. Family and friends can be a source of support, but family can sometimes be left behind when people immigrate, including children, which can be a big source of stress. Children may have a parent or parents who have been deported. And there may be differences in legal statuses between family members where one person might have legal status and someone else is undocumented. So, in terms of practice, the main idea here is to start off with that intersectional lens and to explore the intersectional identity with clients, and then to look kind of outward to each aspect of the Person-in-Culturagram that we've developed, being sure to keep that intersectional framework at the forefront of your mind. So, really thinking about not only the experiences that people might have, but how their social identities might interact with those experiences. And of course, keeping in mind that the client is the best source of information so that they're really where we need to go to learn about them.
Um, yeah, it's very important for us to have this international framework. And we have to realize that people may have some hesitation, especially I talked about the legal status. And I think now probably more than ever, we have to be really careful how we approach this and working with people because immigrants, because we don't want to put people in a more dangerous situation than they already feel. Uh, again, there's an issue with acculturation. Um, I don't think we should force everyone to be acculturated. People do it at their own pace. And it's really important that people feel it's okay for them to retain their own culture. I mean, I was very concerned when I found there were some people who really didn't want their children to speak Spanish at all, and they didn't speak a word of Spanish. So I think we have to be really respectful and encourage people to maintain their culture. And then also we know in terms of health and mental health, that we have to respect a person's beliefs about it. But we have to open up options for people. And I think that's a big part of what we do as social workers. We tell them about resources that they can use. We work to have more resources available for them. So this is an important part of us working with, with families, immigrant families. Next.
So, in terms of assessing trauma, we can assume that immigrants are at high risk for having had one or more traumatic events. That doesn't mean that they have, but just that there's a high likelihood. And that people may have distrust in systems like the police and in even social workers. So, when facing a traumatic event such as domestic violence, they may not feel comfortable going to the police or talking to social workers if they feel that they're aligned with the police or with ICE. Helping clients to connect to religious or cultural institutions can be a great way to help build support for clients and potentially working on a meso level to try to create community if those institutions don't already exist can be another great way to build support. Helping clients to access work and education, so keeping in mind how complicated those systems can be and helping them to access them is one of the ways we can approach that. And then asking about family structure and power with curiosity, remembering that the dominant family structures here may not be the same as elsewhere.
And that often leads to conflict in families when it's challenged the family structure that people have had before, and which it's approached differently here, and I've seen that a lot of times it leads to conflict within families.
Mm.
Okay, next slide.
So we have
Slide.
a quick case study. Elaine, should we do it?
No, fine. You go ahead.
Okay. So we have time for it. So this is a quick annotated case study, not in depth, but just to give you a sense of what we're thinking about. So in this case study, Anna, a 32-year-old woman who immigrated 3 years ago from Costa Rica, has come to see you at your clinic that mostly serves people on Medicaid for individual therapy. She's citing increased stress due to difficulty sleeping and persistent headaches. So the idea here, again, it's hard to see, is to start with the intersectional lens, to start in the center. And the first things that kind of pop out are race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, and language. And that on all of these, Anna is likely to be in a more, for lack of a better word, powered down position or more likely to experience a difficult time or oppression. So Anna's access to power is limited and more likely to face oppression, and that these oppressions can intersect to create experience. Moving from that, we can then look at these kind of outer circles. So Anna might say that her reason for relocating was financial opportunity, but she's finding it tough. For legal status, she might be a green card holder, but her long-term boyfriend is not documented, and she says she's scared of ICE. In terms of acculturation, she may speak English fairly well, live in a neighborhood with lots of other people immigrating from Spanish-speaking countries, so having lots of support. In terms of healthcare and mental health care, she's primarily using the emergency room for care. finding the system confusing and feel that the doctors are not taking her pain seriously. So one of the things that's important to note here is that she's saying up here that she's having difficulty sleeping and persistent headaches. So we want to be really help her to find out if there is a physical issue going on, because we know that these issues can come up, especially in terms of the intersectional lens, that people of color and women are not always taken seriously when they have concerns. So in terms of trauma and crisis events, she's not presenting with these, but given an intersectional identity and status as an immigrant, we just want to be aware of the possibility. She's Catholic, so she's going to church weekly and finds a strong community there. In terms of access to work and education, she's finding most available work to be labor intensive and low paid. And in terms of a family, she does most of the housework labor in addition to her job, and she also cares for her boyfriend's mother. So this is just to give us a better sense of Anna's experience, both from that intersectional lens, but also in these important elements that are shaping her life and to help us as social workers understand clients.
Oh, okay. Next, thanks so much, Dr. Charter. It's for sharing that really interesting example, and I'm sure everyone had some examples from from their practice. So now it's time for you to share with us. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns? Well, where do you see us going with this? Where do you think we should go?
Feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat, whatever makes you feel more comfortable.
Do you have anything yet?
We've had some comments in the chat throughout as you two were talking. Oh, we have a question. Please feel free to unmute. Smita.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Hi, Dr. Congress. I'm sorry, I can't see. There's too many things open. And your co-presenter. I
Hi,
didn't get the name.
Dr.
Hi.
Charter. Nice to see you.
Sorry. Yeah, Dr. Charter. So I have a question. Is there any scope for us to consider some of the strengths of the immigrant communities? Because yes, the culturegram kind of captures very well the different, need-based kind of aspects of immigrant families, women. But immigrants also come with a very rich set of strengths, I would say, especially within their communities, support systems that already exist in the country that they're going to, which not only includes immigrant groups in terms of social support, but also civil society, right? So a whole range of not-for-profits, different affiliations, coalitions, there is considerable strength in some of these macro or meso, maybe, setups. Is there a way to draw and pull those into your culturegram as you're assessing immigrants while working with them?
In other words, to include more strengths.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay, that's a very good idea. Perhaps maybe it's too much of a deficit model, and we should really think more of strengths that immigrants bring to us. Also, let me just say, we do everything from our own perspective. And both Molly or Dr. Charter and I are both white women. And I'm sure we bring this perspective, with us in the way we conceived of this. So,
right.
Which I think this is, important then for us to think about.
Right. Yeah, because you also have a lot of immigrants that are very high skilled. They're capacities are very high, and they do contribute within the immigrant communities. And depending on the index or indices of how much a particular immigrant has access to these resources, will also make a big difference on their well-being, right? So an immigrant woman, an immigrant family that is considerably isolated, or does not have access to these resources either from within their community or within the country where they're going, might have significantly lower well-being in different domains, as opposed to others that might have. And you mentioned New York City multiple times. So there's a solid support system. There is a lot of everything, right? Here in the city. It might not be the same in other parts of the country, but we do already know that immigrant political, community-based organizing, that there's a lot of that exists. And I think we should consider a way to assess if an immigrant has access to those or not.
Well, you make such excellent points. It's really true. I mean, that's another, I don't mean I'm a white woman. I'm a white woman who spent most of her life in New York City. So you can see this in the way I view immigrants. And it's a really interesting point is it'd be interesting to have someone present about immigrants in like a rural community in another place in the United States, to just see how it differs. Um, so I mean, I think that's a really important point that we always bring ourselves into this. I mean, it's not, and also this is part of cultural humility. It's not just us talking about immigrants. We're all aware of who we are and our own position and and the way we see things and the way we discuss things. So I mean, it's a very valid, point that you make, that um, we perhaps we need other looks at this, and other people should participate in terms of working and talking about immigrants. And we need to have immigrants themselves tell their stories. I mean, well, we don't have it for this presentation, but I mean, it would be very interesting for an immigrant to, share his or her own experience.
Absolutely. Dr. Best, you are muted, my dear.
Oh, thank you very much. Hi, great presentation. If you don't mind putting the slide down so we could all see each other, that might be really good. I wanted to thank you. I've used, as you know, over the years, I've used your culturegram, so I'm very familiar with it. I have two questions or two statements. One is, given the environment today, having permanent residency or even naturalized citizenship um, is no longer does not have the social capital it used to. I think
Mhm.
that's the best way I could address that. And so it would be interesting to know how that sort of plays out in the cultural genogram. Most times we think about people who are undocumented or have some type of temporary protective status versus people who have their green card or and residency as well as citizenship, because that is no longer um, doesn't have the currency it used to. So that's one thing. The other is, it sounds like the intersectionality model is a very prevalent one that's being used, yet it sounds like the name of it is a feminism. And so it felt contradictory,
Hmm.
just from my perspective.
Okay, that's a very interesting idea. Maybe do you can think of another way, another way it could be called?
Yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah.
It's such a central piece of it, which is good. I think even the original one started to talk about intersectionality without naming it, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's a significant component of how to look at people from a holistic perspective. Um, but I would not say that it's feminist, particularly since we know that the feminist leaves out a lot of other identity, right? It's not
Right.
necessarily.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah,
think yeah.
thank you for that. So, intersectionality was developed within the feminist scholarship and feminist framework, and the idea is that that even though feminists were people who kind of developed it, that it works to encapsulate many social identities. So it's not necessarily separate in that way.
Right. I think intersectionality builds on feminist
Mm,
theory, which was limited, which is why intersectionality to some degree
yeah.
evolved. And so, given that, how do we return to this to a name that
Mm.
for most people exudes some type of limitation? Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense. It's such a an important topic, and I actually did my dissertation around feminist identity and why people might call themselves feminist or not. So I could talk for a very long time about this. But yeah, just to say noted, and that's a really nice point that you're making.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And also, I just wanted to um, react to the first part of what you said about people have so many different, immigrant families have, there's so many different, statuses in the
Right.
same, and it's particularly challenged in the same family. You're going to have some who are citizens, some, children who were born here. You were some who have some protection still because they're DACA status.
Right.
You're going to have, some families who have, some members have green cards,
Mhm.
and you're going to have some members who, are undocumented. And so this is, like a real challenge of a family where people have such different statuses and how we're going to work on it.
Especially in this climate, eh? Even
Right,
those
exactly.
who used to be secure is no longer secure.
All right. Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
And also, I think there was a comment, something about that I was having a mosaic, uh, and and I think that this is like really a really interesting idea.
Mm.
Okay. Norma, we'll take your question last and then we'll close the event. Please feel free to.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So, but listening to this, I'm an immigrant who came to this United States in 1991. And actually, when I came, I thought it was illegal, but I crossed with a border card, so I wasn't never considered illegal. So I overstay my stay, but I never knew that until I was going through my green card process. So that might be also something that we get confused because when we come from a different country, we don't know what's actually happening here. So, and making assumptions of, because I noticed on the assessment, we're assuming that this is happening because of that. So I think like letting them tell the stories is actually a key point in this kind of assessment. I came here with a degree, but I didn't know how to do with my degree. So I started from ground zero. I got my GD in Spanish and then I moved up and I have a master's degree now. But so it is a lot of education and understanding what is guiding us to get better when we get here, what we need to do to actually reach out the goal. I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Norma, for that last comment. I want to thank Dr. Congress and Dr. Charter for tonight's presentation. Dr. Congress, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say, I want to thank people also for coming. And also, I mean, this is the first time that we're meeting, some of you, but not the last time, I hope. If you have any questions, please feel free, or any comments, please feel free to share, with Molly, with Dr. Charter, and myself. And I'm very intrigued by some of some of your comments, and I want to follow up on. And I'll tell you, this is what I've changed over the years, the Culturegram, from audiences that I presented it about, and people have come up with like great ideas. So this may be the beginning of kind of a real change. So thank you very much for sharing, and please send me comments or questions that are, just to kind of keep in touch.
I just want to say one quick thing. One, you got those comments from 3 immigrant women that gave you comments. And the other thing is, Angelique, can you share about the other presentations coming up this week?
Yes, this is the first event of the immigration series, as noted in the opening remarks. We have a full schedule. Every evening from 6 to 7, we'll be hosting. This is presented by the NASW New York Immigration and Global Social Work Collective. When you registered for this event, there should have been a question asking if you were interested in being further connected with the collective. We will pass that information along to them so you all can be further connected and you could get more information. We do hope to see you at tomorrow's event and the following events of the series. Once again, thank you all for being here. I appreciate you all. Thank you for supporting NASW New York chapter programming and CARES Community Engagement Initiative programming as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you again.